Hey guys, Sean here. Welcome to the F1 Word and to the debrief for the 2019 Hungarian Grand Prix. As ever, I'll be giving my thoughts on the race before running through every team and driver, but before any of that, let's start by having a look at the final race result and what that all means for the championship standings. It was Lewis Hamilton who took the win in Hungary ahead of Max Verstappen and Sebastian Vettel who took the final place on the podium. Charles Leclerc was fourth in the second Ferrari with Carlos Sainz in fifth once again for McLaren and Pierre Gasly in sixth for Red Bull. Kimi Raikkonen ended the race in seventh with Valtteri Bottas recovering to eighth, more on that later, and Lando Norris was in ninth, with Alex Albon taking the final points for Toro Rosso for 10th place. Sergio Perez was 11th for Racing Point with Nico Hülkenberg 12th, Kevin Magnussen 13th and Daniel Ricciardo 14th. The second Toro Rosso of Daniel Kvyat was 15th with George Russell 16th and Lance Stroll 17th. And then the final two classified finishers were Antonio Giovinazzi and Robert Kubica, with Romain Grosjean being the only retirement from the Grand Prix. All of that means that Lewis Hamilton has extended his lead in the Drivers' Championship. He has 250 points to Valtteri Bottas' 188. And Max Verstappen, is he a title outsider? 181 points is a big ask, but he's certainly putting himself in the position to challenge, potentially. Sebastian Vettel is fourth for Ferrari on 156 points, starting to pull away now from Charles Leclerc in fifth on 132. Pierre Gasly sits on just 63 points so far for Red Bull and is only 5 points clear of Carlos Sainz in seventh. Kimi Raikkonen moves ahead of Daniel Kvyat into 8th place on 31 points with the Russian on 27, and then it's Lando Norris rounding out that top 10 on 24 points. In the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes are basically gone, as we've known for a while now, 438 points for them. And then it's Ferrari on 288, just 44 clear of Red Bull in third place on 244. That is definitely the battle to keep an eye on in the top three. McLaren are fourth and are looking very good for that best of the rest title on 82 points. And then it's Toro Rosso on 43 and Renault on 39, with Alfa Romeo 7th on 32 points, Racing Point 8th on 31 points, Haas are 9th on 26, and Williams still have just that 1 point in 10th. Right then, now that is all out of the way, let's get on to some of my opinions of the race. Hungary is not generally, as I've said before, a race I tend to look forward to. And if I'm being totally honest, I really did expect that we would come crashing back down to earth with a massive bump this weekend, after getting to enjoy those three awesome races. But Hungary delivered, as far as it tends to anyway. There was some great battling throughout the field, not that we saw anywhere near all of it on the TV, but the focus needed to be at the front really. There was some proper good strategy intrigue and we finally got to see Lewis Hamilton versus Max Verstappen right at the front. The pace those two were running at was absolutely relentless. Sure, yeah, Hamilton had to back off a few times to cool his brakes and all of that, but for the most part they were pretty much flat out. That was evidenced by the fact they lapped up to and including Carlos Sainz in 5th place. And I'm fairly confident that had they not made the second pit stops, they would have lapped at least one, if not both, of the Ferraris, the entire field between them. It was great to watch, properly tense as well, and I absolutely loved just about every second of it. Is it going to go down as one of the greatest races of all time? No, of course, probably not. It may well not even be remembered as one of the best races of this season, but it was a really good Hungarian Grand Prix, and it's a significant race going forward as well. As Sky was saying in commentary a lot, it really did feel like the start of the next generation, the changing of the guard as Martin Brundle would put it. I also think, and I'm hoping to do a separate video on this soon, and I have kind of already touched on it in this one, but I think Verstappen has now emerged as a genuine title outsider, and with all due respect to Valtteri Bottas, for me at least, Max is probably now Hamilton's biggest threat for that title. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still think Hamilton's got it in the bag, but Max has certainly got an outside chance of threatening that. And even if we don't end up with a tense title fight with Red Bull on form, well, with one driver anyway, and Ferrari likely to bounce back at the power tracks, like Spa and Monza for example, we are still set for some seriously good racing between now and when the flag falls in Abu Dhabi. They were just a few of my ponderings there, but there is so much more I really want to say, but I don't want this video to run for about 6 hours, and there will be plenty of time over the next 3 weeks to go over some of those thoughts, so let's move on and run through all of the teams and drivers, starting with Mercedes. Fantastic drive from Lewis Hamilton to turn around that deficit in the last, 20 odd laps? But also, as many will agree, what a call from Mercedes on the pit wall. Spot on. Yeah, okay, they had nothing to lose. They had the gap back to Ferrari, of course. So it was well worth trying something different. And if we take the team at face value, they really were not sure it would work. So it was a risk, but it was a risk that in the end was clearly worth it. The fight at the front had pretty much reached, I guess, stalemate. Hamilton was more than able to close that gap down to Verstappen, but he couldn't really follow the Red Bull for long due to the overheating and concerns over his brake wear. So yeah, great call from Mercedes, and Lewis Hamilton really wasn't sold on it over team radio, was he? Now, of course, fresh tyres versus old worn tyres was always going to be a huge benefit for Lewis once he caught Max. At the end of the day, though, he still needed to deliver the laps to close Max down post-race. Hamilton said he was right on the limit trying to close that gap, and every single lap was like a qualifying lap. It was genuinely such a tense watch, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that one. But tense or not, it was fantastic. He did, of course, almost take the lead earlier in the race at turn 4 with what, quite frankly, would have been an awesome move around the outside. Max was understandably massively defensive through the first few corners, and that left him vulnerable on that run to turn 4. He covered the inside though. Hamilton decided to go to the outside, but he couldn't get his Mercedes slowed down enough, ran off the track and had to ultimately concede the position back to Verstappen. But again, what a move that would have been. I think I said in the stream last night, passing another car around the outside of turn 4 would certainly be a move worthy of winning a Grand Prix. On the other side of the garage, though, it was another disappointing race for Bottas, a race that he really needed to deliver in with his future right on the line. He didn't get the best initial start. It wasn't a terrible start, but it wasn't great. He then locked up into turn 1, made a small amount of contact with his teammate through turn 3, and then was hit by Charles Leclerc, or hit Charles Leclerc, depending on how you want to look at that on the run to turn 4, but I will talk more on that a little bit later. That obviously damaged his front wing, which resulted in him falling back through the field and eventually having to make a very early pit stop for repairs, which left him plumb last. I fully expected to see Valtteri throw caution to the wind and make his way through the field, and the team were telling him over team radio that 6th was still possible and was the target. Now, Jonty made the point during last night's stream, and I think me and Stuart both pretty much agreed with him, that Bottas did not make his way through the field anywhere near as quickly as we expected. Yes, it is a tough track to overtake on, and that Merc is designed to be out front, not following other cars. But he's in the fastest car on the grid, a car that is, I'm sorry, far better than anything in that midfield. His future with that team is on the line, and although 8th is a decent recovery drive, I can't help but feel that he would have made the top 6 if he got some of the moves done more quickly. I know there will be reasons and excuses, but the bottom line is he needed to deliver yesterday, and for one reason or another, he didn't. All that being said, I'm now going to make some excuses for him. He did make a second pit stop, and that cost him more time and more track position, and he's got to make that up again. And obviously, he was screwed after that contact with Leclerc. So, although he didn't make his way through as quickly as we expected, there were some reasons behind that. I'm not going to turn this into a silly season video, there's plenty of time for that over the next 3 weeks, but I really can't shake the feeling that that could well have been the day that Bottas lost his Mercedes seat. Down at Red Bull, Max Verstappen once again drove brilliantly, and although understandably gutted to lose the win, he did concede after the race that they were beaten by the faster car on the day and a very sharp strategy call. He controlled the pace well early on and did have to do some defending as Hamilton tried to get past, which, as I touched on earlier, he almost did at turn 4. Red Bull pitted him before Mercedes at the first round of pit stops, and when I think back to watching that race, I remember thinking that that was a really good call and that could have won Max the race. However, after Merc made that second pit stop, there wasn't really anything Verstappen could do. His tyres were absolutely done by the time Hamilton caught him, and let's be honest, the writing was on the wall. He tried to defend though, but he had nothing to give really, and the Mercedes breezed right around the outside of him at turn 1. Red Bull then took the decision to pit Max for some fresh soft tyres, and then he duly delivered the fastest lap and picked up that bonus point. I guess the big question then is, should Red Bull have pitted Max as soon as Mercedes pitted Lewis? Let me know what you think on that one in the comments section, but for me, at the time, I expected Red Bull to respond. But I was conflicted because track position is so important around that circuit. So I think if I'd been in Red Bull's position, I would have made the same call. However, Verstappen wasn't sure, was he? He felt like they should have pitted him. And of course, with the huge benefit of hindsight, he was right and the team should have listened to him. Okay, he would have lost track position, but he could have taken the fight to Hamilton, and he would have had a better chance of winning the race rather than sitting up front waiting for the silver arrows to catch him and cruise past. What I mean by that is that he would have been able to put up more of a fight on new tyres rather than old ones that were done. Then again, if the team felt that the Mercedes was the quicker car on the day, I can totally understand why they left Verstappen out, I guess, in the hope that Hamilton couldn't catch him in time. Again though, as I say, that's all with the benefit of hindsight. At the end of the day, it was a very tough call for Red Bull to make, and Mercedes forced them into that corner. I also have no doubt whatsoever that had Max been in second and Lewis was leading, Red Bull will have absolutely pulled the same strategy move. Still though, great driving for Verstappen all weekend, and he finally of course has a pole position to his name. As for his teammate though, I'll say it again, as many people are, it just was not good enough. That Red Bull was at worst the second fastest car in Hungary, and he finishes 6th behind 2 Ferraris and a McLaren. By the way, 2 Ferraris that were nowhere near the pace of that Red Bull and the Mercedes this weekend. And that's not to mention the fact that he was lapped by his teammate. How long can he realistically hang on to that seat? The team seems to be adamantly staying to the end of the season, but will Marko stay that patient? He was swamped off the line by those behind, but in his defence, I guess, that was always a possibility, some might say a probability, with him starting on the mediums and those behinds on the softs. But I'm sorry, he should be making his way past Carlos Sainz. Yes, he finished 6th, which is what we've all been saying he needs to be doing, but that whole finishing 6th thing is dependent on the 2 Mercs, the 2 Ferraris and his teammate being ahead. With Bottas dropping back through the field and out of contention, he should have been finishing at least 5th. It is hard to overtake in Hungary, I know that, but I don't want to keep saying that in this video because I'm going to be saying it a million times. But there were others out there that were getting it done, and he should be finishing ahead of a McLaren. Nothing against Sainz, but that's a fact. Also, Bottas had an absolute shocker of a first lap, didn't really make his way through the field as I've already gone over as we expected, and he made one more stop than Gasly, but only finished just over 3 seconds behind Pierre. And don't forget the Finn had to deal with overtaking others as well. You all know, I am rooting for Gasly, I really am. I want him to get his act together so badly, but he's just not cutting it at the minute, and I'm not convinced Helmut Marko, as I've already touched on, will be as patient with him as he's making out in the press. I guess on that we'll see, but if he is given to the end of the season, he really needs to step up, but I feel like I've been saying that for the last 5 or 6 races. Again, not good enough on Sunday. On to Ferrari, and do you know what? I think I'd call that damage limitation for them this weekend. Despite some recent good form in Hungary, it just wasn't a track they expected to be strong at, but they ended up 3rd and 4th, picking up a decent points haul. However, they were both a minute down on the leaders despite making 1 less pit stop than them, and that is a huge margin. On Seb, he did a really good job at managing his tyres through that first stint, which allowed him to move on to the softs, whereas his teammate had to go onto the mediums. That, in turn, meant that Seb was much quicker in the second phase of the race and was able to close down Charles and pass him to take that final step on the podium. It was a nice battle at the end between the two of them, but I'm not going to lie, I did take a very sharp intake of breath when I saw Leclerc move to defend against Vettel. Don't get me wrong, it was totally fair, but it was just one of those, oh crap, that was close moments. I mean, replays did kind of take the edge off it, but when you're watching it live, it did look dramatic. Despite taking 4th, I would say it was a bit of a scruffy weekend for Leclerc. He was in the wall during qualifying, of course, and despite the fact that he did go on to out-qualify Seb, it was still another mistake. Onto that incident with Bottas on the opening lap though, the onboard footage from Vettel's car does look quite damning. It absolutely looks as though Charles sweeps across unnecessarily, to quote Bottas, and he hits the Mercedes front wing. But Michael Massey, the F1 race director, says that the onboard footage, quote, distorted it, and that the best angle to watch from is the helicopter view, which in the eyes of the stewards actually shows Bottas turning towards the Ferrari, and so they took the view that it was actually Bottas's front wing that hit Leclerc's rear tyre rather than the other way around. And to be fair to them, having watched the helicopter footage this morning, I can kind of see the point being made. There is a moment where Valtteri seems to turn right very slightly and briefly. Leclerc is undoubtedly moving to the left, but there is just a slight movement to the right from Bottas. And by the way, I'm not saying that that should be a penalty because I don't think it should be, especially having looked at it again this morning from that other angle. Honestly though, not much else to say on Ferrari's race. Aside from that incident and the overtake from Vettel towards the end, we didn't really see much of them. And that's going to be the case for much of the midfield as well. The focus was very much on the front two, which again, I totally get. So I'm going to have to go off the team's press releases for probably all of the midfield, which means this might get a little bit scripted, so apologies for that. But I do not remember seeing much, if anything at all, of Carlos Sainz and his brilliant drive to take 5th place again. He made a cracking start and was even challenging the Ferraris into turn 2, but couldn't quite get a move done around the outside and settled into 5th place. Sainz described fending off Pierre Gasly in the second stint as intense, but let's be honest, I bet he took great pleasure in beating him to the line. He also said that he found the result much more satisfying than last time out in Hockenheim, and I guess that does make sense, because the race in Hungary was down to a really good start, great pace and some solid defensive driving, so it was on merit, rather than him benefiting from the chaos around him. I keep saying it, but Sainz is really impressing me this year. Lando Norris, he was looking good for a solid result as well and was actually in with a shot of finishing ahead of Gasly too. However, he ended up having to endure a very slow pit stop and that was what cost him a few positions in the end. Still though, it's a couple of points, another good showing from the rookie, and without jinxing them, I'm going to make a mid-season prediction. I think McLaren have got 4th place pretty much sewn up already. Now I will take the backlash after the final race if it all falls apart now, but what a first 12 races for McLaren. Again, we didn't really see much of Alpha, yet Kimi Raikkonen once again did what Kimi seems to do best this year, and that's fly under the radar and pick up another very good result, 7th this time around, and some seriously decent points for the team. The Finn was actually pretty pleased with the result post-race, saying that the car was behaving well and describing his race as, and I mean brace yourself for this, some proper emotion from Kimi, he described it as, quote, quite good. He also said that he felt as though his Alpha had more pace than the McLaren's, but added it was impossible to overtake. Antonio Giovinazzi didn't have the best of afternoons, ending up, as you saw earlier, a long way off his teammate. Now, according to Gio, he had contact on his first lap, and actually thinking back, I do seem to remember seeing a replay of him taking quite a hefty whack. It reminded me, actually, of what happened to Leclerc pretty much at the same point last season. He also ended up having to cut his first stint short due to some tyre issues, and that all pretty much compromised his race. Down at Toro Rosso, it was a disappointing end to a promising weekend for Daniel Kvyat, who has since said that the strategy just did not work out for him. The team pitted him early, he felt that it was too early, and that resulted in his tyres falling off the cliff in the closing 15 laps, and that was pretty much that for his race. Well, apart from one moment which we totally forgot about last night, so apologies for that, but more on all of that in a second. Alex Albon picked up the final point for 10th place, but admitted post-race that he didn't feel comfortable during the first stint on those medium tyres and was certainly much happier on the hards. All in all, 10th was about the best the team could have hoped for according to Albon, and I tend to agree with that one, especially from 12th and 13th on the grid. Now, there was a very tasty scrap between the two of them on lap 18. Kvyat looked to have the move done in turn 1, but Albon came back at him and the two of them were side by side through turns 2 and 3. Proper wheel-to-wheel racing, absolutely loved it. And they stayed that way all the way up to turn 4, where Albon was squeezed off track by Kvyat and ended up running wide and basically conceding the position. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And that is how teammates should be racing each other, hard but fair and without wiping each other out. I wonder if Gunther Steiner has requested a copy of the footage. It was a relatively quiet day for Racing Point. There was one incident between Sergio Perez and Alex Albon in the battle for the final point. Albon went for the move into turn 1 and Checo just turned in on him, quite frankly. Ultimately, he knew Albon was there because he was watching him in his mirrors. It was a cheeky move, let's put it that way, but both cars continued, Albon made the move stick, and I guess that's all that matters at the end of the day. The stewards did take a look at it but didn't dish out any penalties, and actually, it was another weekend where the stewards just let them race. Thank you, that's what we want. Lance Stroll, I couldn't tell you much about his race at all, quite frankly. I suppose in a somewhat out-of-character moment he did make a poor start, something he usually nails, but reading his quotes in the team's press release, he just says that he got stuck behind George Russell for the whole race and that the team were expecting to struggle ahead of this weekend, but that's that, really. If I've missed anything on Lance Stroll, like a mega move around the outside of Max Verstappen, I don't know, do let me know in the comment section. I'm pretty sure I didn't. Nico Hülkenberg had an engine control issue with his Renault, and that was, according to the German, costing him around about 0.3 of a second a lap. That's a lot when you think about it over the course of a race. Struggling with that obviously meant that the points were pretty much out of reach for him, but he did just about hold on to keep Kevin Magnussen and Daniel Ricciardo behind in the closing stages. But I really do not think Renault will be happy at all with their weekend on the whole. Daniel Ricciardo ended up starting from the back after qualifying down in 18th place, thanks to getting in a tangle, if you like, with Sergio Perez in a final corner in qualifying, just compromising each other's final runs. The team then took the decision to fit some new parts to his power unit, hence why he started last. He went a different way on strategy compared to those around him starting on the hard tyres, and I think he did something like 46 laps on them in the end. There was a great scrap throughout the race between him and Kevin Magnussen, which I felt like went on forever. The Aussie wasn't happy with K-Mag though and felt that he was moving under braking to defend, and he was getting, I think it's fair to say, pretty flustered over team radio. It was, though, a very frustrating day for Danny Rick and the whole team, really. There is a lot of work to do at Renault over the summer, where they can, that is. As I move on to Haas, I'm going to stick with Magnussen and those defensive moves in his battle with Ricciardo. In my view, and as I said last night, they were right on the limit, but it was hard racing, and I don't think any of them were especially late. Again, just on the limit. Apparently, though, race control did feel the need to issue a warning to him over the moves. He was sort of positive after the race, saying that compared to how they had been performing in recent races, the pace wasn't too bad. Romain Grosjean, he was actually running pretty well and in the points through the first stint, but as soon as he switched to the hard tyres, his pace just seemed to fall away. In fact, Grosjean said post-race that as the team hadn't really run the hard tyre over the weekend, they didn't ideally want to have to use it, and stated there was no grip and he was unable to get any temperatures into those tyres. At the end of it all, though, his car developed a water pressure issue and he had to retire from the Grand Prix. Just like Renault, there is a lot of work to do for Haas over the summer break, and who knows, that could even include changes on the driver front. We'll see. And finally, it's Williams. I think George Russell was one of the stories of qualifying after just missing out on Q2 by half a tenth. What a story that would have been. Russell said that the race was a case of, quote, back to reality, but did enjoy his battles with other drivers, and he did finish ahead of both Lance Stroll and Antonio Giovinazzi. There are a hell of a lot of positives for the team to take away from this weekend, and they have almost certainly taken a step forward, but there is obviously still a long way to go. Robert Kubica ended up 3 laps down and over half a minute behind his teammate, but has said that he was pretty much expecting the race to go that way, with tyre management being vital to making the one-stop strategy work. He also added that he was not happy with the feeling of the car, but went on to thank the support of the Polish fans who turned up in pretty massive numbers over the weekend. Again, sorry for having to go off press releases for this part of the video and if it felt a little bit scripted, but as I've already said a few times in this video, all of the focus was on that battle between Verstappen and Hamilton, which again I totally get and agree with, but we didn't really get to see all that much of the rest of the field as a result. All in all though, it was a really decent race, and as I said in last night's stream, I kind of don't want the summer break to start just yet, but F1 will be back before you know it. That is it then for the Hungarian Grand Prix debrief, but once again there is a poll in the top right of the screen where you can rate the race. And don't forget that you can of course let me know your thoughts on the weekend down in the comment section. Now, it may well be the summer break, but there will still be plenty of content uploaded to the channel over the next few weeks. And if nothing else news-wise emerges, silly season will definitely be fun to cover once again. In the meantime though, don't forget that you can follow me over on social media, and all of the links you need for that are in the description down below. But as ever, thank you for watching. I've been Sean, this has been the F1 Word, and until next time, goodbye.